Okay, all right. Nice to see everyone this morning. I want to talk to you a little bit about urban agriculture and how I got involved in it and how a team of us around California have really been studying it to see, who are urban farmers, what kind of resources and assistance do they need. We started this, a number of us who work for UC Cooperative Extension around California. I'm sure many of you are affiliated with UCR. I'm sure you all know what land-grant universities are, but for a few students or others who may not, land-grant universities and their local arm, county cooperative extension offices, have traditionally worked with farmers around the U.S. for more than 100 years now, teaching farmers how to produce food and other crops more efficiently. So a few years ago, I would say around 2008, 2009, we started noticing that there was a need out in communities that we weren't meeting. On the one hand, we have our cooperative extension farm advisors who work with commercial farmers, often highly specialized commercial farmers, like this guy on the left here. That's our farm advisor, Andre Biscaro, who works in Ventura and Los Angeles counties. And he's working with an alfalfa farmer on a variety trial. And then on the right there, you see our logo for our UC Master Gardener program, where we have volunteers all over the state who work with home gardeners, clearly non-commercial horticulture. But we started seeing this sort of emerging gray area that was not clearly backyard gardening, nor was it clearly what we traditionally think of as commercial agriculture that our farm advisors work with. It was places like this urban farm in Pasadena. It's a school garden, so its role is educational, but the students also had a small business where they ran a community-supported agriculture, or CSA. They were growing and selling flowers. They were distributing food into the community. So it's not a traditional school garden either that's just for education purposes. So it's this sort of, it's gone beyond just simply gardening for your own family's use, your own personal use, or strictly educational like a school garden. It's evolved into something that looks more like agriculture. And we started seeing quite a bit of this sort of thing around the state. And frankly, a lot of us who work in cooperative extension, when we sort of first started looking at this in 2008, 2009, 2010, folks were a little skeptical, like, is this something we should really spend our time and resources on? Perhaps this is something that's very trendy. Perhaps this is something that's not a good use of our time and resources, because we've gone through, as every UC campus has, many rounds of budget cuts. We're understaffed, people retire, and we can't fill their positions to work with commercial farmers. So how can we extend ourselves in this area? But could it be something that is deserving of our attention? Even though it's very, very small scale and marginally commercial, does it have the power to transform communities by improving food access, for example? So we'll talk a little bit about that. But that's what our team wanted to know. Some of our skepticism about should we work on this as a UC Cooperative Extension, UC Ag and Natural Resources team was allayed by the fact that municipalities around California were getting on board with this thing anyway. They were making decisions about local policies related to urban agriculture to facilitate urban agriculture, often because of pressure from local advocacy groups, and oftentimes they were making decisions maybe without looking at the science behind certain decisions. And so we really did feel like this is the role of the University of California, to provide some science-based assistance with decision-making about these community matters that relate to agriculture, even if it isn't agriculture as we traditionally envisioned it. So we wanted to see what could we do as an institution. Despite the fact that we'd had budget cuts, we were spread thin. And we already had difficulty serving our existing clientele. That situation has not changed. So we formed a little team. We got a grant, and we started working on things like a needs assessment to see what were the needs out there? What did these urban farmers look like? Who were they? And how could we help them? First, we had to come up with a definition of urban ag. I think there's a lot of folks out there who maybe do some intensive gardening in their backyard and they call themselves urban farmers. There's others who maybe have a big lush school garden and they call it an urban farm. But we wanted to define urban agriculture as something where products are being sold or otherwise put out into the food system. So, for example, that school garden I showed before, clearly an urban farm because they're selling their produce. So the steps we took were, first we did a lit review because we wanted to see, okay, there's a lot of hype around urban farming. This was back in maybe 2010 or so when there was a lot of positive newspaper coverage about urban farming. So we wanted to see, what does the research really show about it? We wanted to survey our staff to see what they were doing on it. I'm not going to talk about that too much today. And we were going to visit a lot of urban farms. So what did the research say about urban agriculture? We looked at 3 specific dimensions: social, economic, and health. We really wanted to know, okay, beyond the fact that this is popular and this is fun and people get excited about it, what does the research say about what impacts it can have on communities? So looking first at social impacts, this is sort of the area where there's been the most research and there's many clear benefits. And it was interesting that when we did that word cloud, the word community came through loud and clear because indeed that's what we did see. So you have things like people accessing land in their community and feeling a sense of ownership for it, perhaps for the first time, getting to know people in their community in a way they haven't before, enjoying being outside and nature in their community, where perhaps in a dense urban environment you don't get too many opportunities to do that, and a lot of opportunities for intergenerational learning of seniors and kids and teens working together. So there's a lot that clearly shows that urban ag can have lots of community benefits. Less on the economic side of things. You know, there are some studies that show some modest job creation or that it can be used for job training and job development, but not a lot of studies yet that show that, for example, that a surrounding area has economic benefits from urban ag. But quite a bit is out there on the health benefits. Now, granted, this doesn't mean that every urban farm has these kinds of benefits. There's, as I'll talk about in a minute, they're so diverse and with such differing goals. It really depends on what they're set up to do and where they're set up to do it. But there's quite a bit out there in the literature that indicates that sometimes urban farms can help to improve food security and food access for participants. In particular, it's pretty clear, a lot of research suggests that people who grow food, for example, whether they're gardening in their backyard or in a community garden or in something like an urban farm, if you're growing food, you're probably eating more fresh fruits and vegetables with the health benefits that come with that in terms of reduction of chronic disease and so forth. So this was the most fun part. We got to go out all over the state and talk to urban farmers and see what their operations looked like and hear from them about what kinds of challenges they were having. So, you know, I realize this is a conference that looks at global issues, and my talk is a little bit more specific to California, but a lot of what's happening on the urban agriculture scene in California is very reflective of what's happening on the urban ag scene throughout the U.S. In other countries, urban agriculture is much more normalized. Here in the U.S., as we'll discuss, there's often a lot of policy barriers and zoning and that sort of thing that has made it a little bit difficult. So what does it look like? Here's an urban farm that's up in the Richmond area near the Bay Area, and this was a traditional area of greenhouses that were used for flower production back in the 1970s and were abandoned as flower production became globalized. And this lady, Pilar, rented these old trashed greenhouses and cleaned them up and started an urban farm there. And she's one of the relatively few for-profit urban farmers in California, and it's similar throughout the rest of the US. Here's a local producer of eggs in a part of Los Angeles called Glassell Park. Definitely a low-income community, a food desert community. He sells his eggs for $1 an egg at the local farmers market. And he shared with me the struggle that he's experienced since he became an urban farmer. And I would say this is quite typical of people who try to do commercial urban agriculture work. He got into this because he wanted to grow and produce food for his community because it's a food desert. People are hungry in his community. But in order to be able to keep his little operation going, he has to sell it at a premium. So I saw this in a number of situations. A couple that has a very small urban farm on their property, and they, again, wanted it to feed the community, but instead they find themselves growing heirloom Italian vegetables and selling them at the Beverly Hills Farmers Market, because that's the only way they can even barely make this work financially. So there's a lot of feeling among for-profit urban farmers that it's really hard to meet that goal of feeding your community, because it may not even be the people in the community who are buying and eating the food that you're so carefully and lovingly producing. Here's another private type of for-profit urban farm that we see sometimes. This is a culinary garden. This is at the Jonathan Club, a private club in downtown LA. This was installed by an urban farming company called Farmscape, and they come in and they create and help maintain gardens like this that maybe a chef is using in their what they're preparing in the restaurant that evening. Again, not really a tool to help feed people. Here's another model that this is a little less common. These kind of startups, such as Local Roots in the city of Vernon, another food desert, low-income community. This is a very intensive growing inside of shipping containers, and they mostly produce lettuces and other greens, and they're actually selling them at Walmart. It sort of remains to be seen how sustainable these kinds of economic models are. So far more than what I just showed you, you will see urban agriculture around California and the US as part of a nonprofit model, or sometimes a government agency. And there's a lot of reasons for that. For one, in the nonprofit context, you can pursue grants and gifts, and you can have volunteer support, so it makes small marginal operations more sustainable. So let me show you a few examples. This is in the Bay Area. This is called Wow Farm. And like many urban farms that are operated by nonprofits, it's all about the mission. Urban farming is a means to the end. In this case, it's about teaching kids entrepreneurship. So the kids learn how to farm, and they have a business model where they sell to local restaurants, and they learn all about how business works by doing that. So it's really more about learning to be a business person than it is about farming, although, they really do enjoy the farming process along the way. And this takes place on a small vacant property right underneath the BART lines in Oakland. A culinary training for young adults. This is part of a Job Corps program on Treasure Island near San Francisco. Again, the means is getting young adults trained to go work as chefs, and part of that experience is learning how to grow things that they use in the kitchen. job training in Long Beach at a public housing development, Carmelitos. They sell what they grow at a farmer's market and through a CSA, and while they do that, people learn job skills to work in the horticulture industry. And this is one in Los Angeles called Community Services Unlimited. They have a small farm called the Expo Farm right next to USC. Very high value land in this neighborhood, but through advocacy efforts, they've managed to hang on to their little tiny land, even when USC wanted to convert it into a parking lot. So this is a very small little farm, but what Community Services Unlimited does to increase food access in that community is they bundle up what they grow with produce that they purchase at a low discounted price from growers in the region, and then they're able to offer these very low cost baskets of produce outside of liquor stores, outside of health clinics, and at other places in the community where people go who might want to buy some really inexpensive fresh produce. So that's one of the models where their whole goal is getting healthy food into people's hands to address the kinds of issues that come up in the communities that we often call food deserts, where it's easy to get fast food, but it's very hard to get healthy food such as fresh produce. So a little bit about the urban farms. We studied, just for this, we studied I think 30 or so, but then since then, I've visited many more, and so they're very tiny. I think the average size of a farm in California, according to the CDFA, is something like 240 acres. So these are very, very small farms, but they often do employ people, even if it's part-time. They often have multiple sites, so they're kind of threading together, like their whole farm might consist of 2 backyards, a little plot of land next to the local public library, and a plot at a school. And so all those spaces together constitute their farm. So there's a lot of creative uses of land, I would say. And also, I want to make the point that not all urban farms are small. This is one in Orange County. It's part of a farm called Orange County Produce, which is actually a very large profitable farm. The city came to them. They're a longtime family farmers. The city encroached on their land, and now they just lease land. Like, this field doesn't even exist anymore. It's since become condos, but before it was condos, they were leasing it to grow organic strawberries. So they look for spaces that are in an interim mode of use for their production. So a few of the challenges that we see typically with urban farmers, and when there's policy action and progress, I'm going to reference those because since we started this project, a ton has been happening on the policy front in California and around the US as well, and I'll mention the California examples. Distribution, scale, and volume are a huge challenge for urban farmers, because imagine you're an urban farmer, maybe you've got a 1/4 acre if you're lucky, and you're at the farmer's market sitting next to a guy from Ventura County who has 25 acres. He can grow more diverse crops, he can grow a better volume of crops, and he can probably offer them at a better price than you can. You know, places like Whole Foods, in theory, will buy from an urban farmer, but they need to have certain quantities, they need to have certain consistency in what they buy, and these things are pretty challenging for urban farmers. Community issues are a big one, and this is in particular, I would say, even most common when you get into animals in urban agriculture, because I may love the sound of chickens outside my window in the morning and the sound of that rooster crowing at 5 a.m., but my neighbor may hate me. So, you know, it's like we often expect that everyone will share these values of having this sort of pastoral stuff happening on our property, and not necessarily. I've seen a lot of fights between neighbors over urban agriculture. And what comes up is that there's a lot of illegality going on in urban agriculture. People are actually doing things that are not legal, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the moment. But they don't find out that what they're doing is illegal until their neighbor gets irritated and calls the city on them when there's a noise they don't like, or parking impacts, or someone has bees and your kid is allergic. So these little issues come up between neighbors, and the city gets involved when someone complains, and that's when you often find out, oh wow, I didn't even know I wasn't supposed to be doing this here, and that it's not an allowable land use. So that gets us into some of the policy issues. Zoning, agriculture is often zoned out of cities, and this happened back in the post-World War II era when California and other parts of the US were often rapidly urbanizing and suburbanizing, and all these brand spanking new communities were being built, and people didn't want slow tractors driving on the streets. They didn't want to smell things like cow manure, so cities wrote agriculture right out of their codes. And so this, 1945 through 1960, you get a lot of agriculture simply zoned out of cities. So now you have local advocacy groups that have names like Goats Not Bombs, and you have local food policy councils, and they're pushing back against these rules that they feel are antiquated, that maybe people wanted a long time ago, but now there's groups of people who want to have goats in their backyard in urban areas, and chickens and bees and so forth. Or they want to be able to have a home business from their home that's all about growing food, and have a farm stand on their property. And all these things then have to be addressed in local city codes. So there's a lot of advocacy going on at the local city level to apply pressure about these things. So also there was a huge question about whether it was even legal to sell what you grew in your yard or at your community garden or your school garden, because the state of California Department of Public Health considered that if it wasn't an approved source, then it wasn't legal to sell it to the public. So recently in 2013, 2014, a couple laws were passed by the state that makes it clear that community gardeners and homeowners who are growing food fall in this category called community food producers. So now it's legal for those groups to sell what they grow. And this is sort of part of a larger trend among public health officials in the state of California, and I would say other places too, where there used to be very strong concerns that it is not safe to do this kind of thing. We don't know if it's safe. Now the thinking is more like, well, this stuff is happening anyway. We might as well just set up some best practices and some easy to follow policies and hope that people follow them. So you've seen the Cottage Food Act, for example, pass in California that allows people to prepare products legally in their home kitchens. And now this sort of same concept is being applied to growing food. Most recently, there's been some legislation passed that allows people to prepare meals in their home kitchens and sell them. So it's sort of part of this trend of saying, okay, people are really into this micro-food economy. Instead of trying to prevent it from happening, because we know it's going to happen anyway, let's just get on board with it as best we can. Lack of resources is huge for urban farmers. They can't get traditional sources of agricultural credit necessarily. Oftentimes they're just using their credit cards. And land is, of course, huge, trying to access land. So this is where there have been some policy developments I'd like to mention. California, again, because of pressure from community advocates at the local level, passed a law, AB 551, that allows cities and counties to set up urban agriculture incentive zones to promote urban agricultural uses of land, and the carrot that's provided for the landowner is that they get a tax deduction if they allow this. We found that the use of it is fairly limited because there's more that you need in order to start a farm. You need land, but you also need capital. This is a site that is one of these urban agriculture incentive zone sites, and you can see that what it was when they got it was a parking lot. So you know, you need the land and you need more resources. Great opportunities for use of public land. There is a great deal of public land just sitting that's available. This is an example in the city of Ontario, not too far away, where part of a park was just sitting vacant, and some community activists said, will you let us use it for an urban farm? And it's called Huerta del Valle, and it's incredibly productive. It's a community garden in the front and this big urban farm in the back that is producing food for the community. And in addition to providing the land, the city subsidizes the water, and they incorporate the farm into federal grants that they apply for that help to make sure Ontario is a healthy community with healthy food. Just briefly, I don't know how much more time I have. I'm done? Very little. Okay. I just wanted to say that based on our needs assessment, we created a website that has lots of resources, and we have created a series of workshops that we do for urban farmers. This is one where we had at all of them we have a panel of urban farmers, and we find that urban farmers are not only beginning farmers, they're often kind of isolated, so they really appreciate these opportunities to learn and network from other farmers. And if you want to follow us on our social media or check out our resources, please do. I'd love to talk to you more on breaks if you're interested in this topic. Thank you.